Welcome to our discussion on perimeter. We're going to first start by looking at the most common measurement system in the world, because to measure perimeter, you have to measure length, and to measure length, you have to have a unit of measure. And for most of the world, that unit of measure is within the metric system, and it's only us stubborn Americans that refuse to pretty much join it. Everybody else has. And so it's a good idea for everybody to be at least somewhat familiar with the metric system in case you decide to travel anywhere outside the United States. So for us, you should be familiar, obviously, with inches, feet, yards, miles, those kind of things. The metric system instead is meters, centimeters, kilometers, and so on and so forth. The nice thing about their system is everything is based on powers of 10. Ours seems awfully arbitrary. A foot has 12 inches, and then a yard has 3 feet, and then a mile has 5,280 feet. It's like, what? Where did those things come from? And they have a very weird and silly, archaic history of, the foot was actually the average length of the monarchs at the time, and all sorts of really stupid things. Whereas the metric system is based on science. It's based on the length of a vibration of a crystal and things like that, and it's much more, I don't know, scientific. Plus the fact that everything is based on powers of 10, which makes it really easy. So it's weird that in the United States we've tried to switch over to the metric system, and the population is very afraid of that, thinking that it's going to be very difficult, when in reality it's a much easier system to learn and memorize. Everything in the metric system is based on Latin words. So centi in Latin means 100, and that's why a centimeter is 1/100th of a meter, right? Well, cent means 100, centi means 0.01, right? And then mil means 1,000, and milli means 1/1000th. So all of these things are based in Latin. So if you know anything about Latin, you know the metric system already. And if you don't, it's pretty easy to memorize it. But more than anything is just knowing that it's all powers of 10, right? So you start with the kind of base thing, whatever it is. So if your base thing is meters, because that's what you use to measure length, then a decimeter, right, is 1/10, right, because it's 10 to the -1, so it's 1/10 of a meter. Centimeter is 1/100th of a meter, or i.e. there are 100 centimeters in 1 meter, there are 10 decimeters in 1 meter, and there are 1,000 millimeters in 1 meter. And then you can go the other direction. A decameter is 10 meters, a hectometer is 100 meters, and then a kilometer, right? Kilometer is 1,000 meters. And then the nice thing is the system works for all units of measure, right? So here we're measuring length, but let's say we want to measure volume. Then we talk about liters, right, for liquid volume. And so the liter is the base of that measurement. And then a milliliter is 1/1000th of a liter, right? So there are 1,000 milliliters in a liter. And then a kiloliter is 1,000 liters, right? So you can now measure liquids with that same kind of staircase scale. And it goes on and on. Anything you want to measure, there's always, a gram is their unit of weight. So a kilogram is 1,000 grams. So again, it's really easy to learn that system because everything's just powers of 10. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Really, you just want to know kind of the basics. You want to know the basic scale. How big is a centimeter? Well, there's 2.54 centimeters in an inch, right? So a centimeter is a little less than 1/2 of an inch, right? How big is a meter? Well, a meter is roughly the same size as a yard, right? It's about 3 feet. How long is a kilometer? Well, it's on the same scale as a mile, but it's like 0.6, right? So it's things like that. How much is a gram? Well, a gram is very little. It's close to like an ounce. And so a kilogram is actually closer to a pound. In fact, there are 2.2 pounds per kilogram, right? So a kilogram is kind of twice as heavy as a pound. So if you know those kind of basic comparisons, it will help you if you ever, like I said, travel outside the United States and you're going into a supermarket and you want to buy some grapes or something, and they sell them in kilograms. You need to know that if you buy a kilogram of grapes, you've just bought 2.2 pounds of grapes. That's a lot of grapes, right? That kind of thing. All right, so this is just showing you that if you can measure in any system, ours or metric, you can always measure more and more precisely by getting smaller and smaller units of measure. So you can go from centimeters and go, well, it's closer to 5 to 6, but then if you go down to millimeters, then you can get even more precise. All right, so now that we know how to measure length, we know how to measure perimeter, because perimeter is all about just measuring the lengths around something. So for when we talk about a polygon, that's just any geometric shape that has straight edges. And poly means many, gon means side, right? So any multi-sided thing, whether it's a triangle, a rectangle, a square, rhombus, and hectagon, and octagons, and all those things, the perimeter is just adding up the sides, right? So there are some obvious ones. Equilateral triangle, all the sides are the same, so obviously the perimeter is just side, side, side with them all being the same, so it's 3 times s, or 3 times the length of one of the sides. Same thing with a square, since they're all the same, it just becomes 4 times that side, right? And if you were doing, we call them regular polygons if they all have the same sized sides, right? So a regular octagon would be an 8-sided shape with all 8 sides being the exact same length. So a regular octagon's perimeter would just be 8 times its side, right? And a regular hexagon would be 6 times its side, and so on and so forth. But for shapes that aren't regular, like rectangles, right, you just have to add up each individual piece. So you can add this length, this width, this length, and this width, but since it's a rectangle, we know the 2 widths are the same and the 2 lengths are the same, so really we could just do 2 times the length plus 2 times the width and kind of save us some time that way. So if we want to find the perimeter of each of these things, right, it's pretty easy to just add up the bits and pieces. So if we have a word problem, a rectangle is 2 by 9, right, 2 centimeters by 9 centimeters. We know the perimeter is very easily just 2 length plus 2w, so we double both of those, add them together, and ta-da, we get 22 centimeters. And see, it doesn't matter if it's centimeters or inches, you're still just doing math, and the little cm for centimeters goes along for the ride, just like the little in for inchwood or the little ft for feet, right? So it really doesn't matter what unit of measure you're in, you're still just adding up some numbers. Simple, easy stuff. And if it's a square, it's even easier, right? Just 4 times the side. Simple, simple, simple. Equilateral triangle, 3 of them. Again, really easy. All 3 sides. All right, so we can do. So it's really simple doing perimeter of basic objects. Even if we have a word problem, it's still pretty easy. All you want to do is draw a picture. And once you draw a picture, it makes it really easy. So if you have a rectangular pen that's 14 feet wide, and you have enough material for 70 feet of fence, and they want to figure out what the length is, well, you know, if it's 14 feet wide, you're going to have 14 feet on one side, 14 feet on the other side. That's 28. You take 28 away from 70. That leaves you with 42. You take 42 and cut it in half. There's 21, right? It's that simple. And it'd be even easier if you drew a picture. Because once you draw a picture and label everything, it's a lot easier for your brain to understand what's going on, and you won't make simple mistakes. So just keep that in mind, that I'm not going to draw pictures here because I want to get all this information on the slides, but drawing a picture is the way to go. All right, circumference. Well, that's just the perimeter of a circular object, right? Circle, circumference. So whenever we're trying to find the perimeter of a circle or anything that's basically curved, we are finding the circumference instead of talking about it as the perimeter, but it's really just a fancy word for the perimeter. And to find circumference, we need to know the radius or the diameter, because remember, radius and diameter are pretty much the same thing. The diameter is just twice as long as the radius, as this picture illustrates. You've got the radius, which is always from the center out to the edge of the circle, and then the diameter goes through the center and goes from side to side. So you can see that this diameter is just twice as long as the radius. So if you know one, you know the other, right? If you know the diameter, you know what the radius is, and if you know the radius, you know what the diameter is. And then circumference is just either 2 times pi times the radius, or the diameter times the radius, right? 2 pi r is usually the more common way of describing diameter, and the reason why is because we know that area is pi r squared, right? So it has all the same things in it. It's got pi and r in it, and area is pi r squared. So it's nice to have both formulas in terms of r. It also turns out that this 2 pi r is the derivative of pi r squared. Those of you that take calculus later, you will discover that. And so it's nice to know that the circumference of a circle is just the derivative of its area. But we all know that 2 times r is the diameter, so that's why sometimes the circumference is listed as pi times d. All right, so it should be pretty simple if they give you some of these questions, right? If I know this is just going to be 4 times pi, 28 times pi. This is going to be 5 times 2, or 10 times pi. Well, the circumference of this entire circle, right, would be a diameter of 2 times pi, but since it's half of it, it would be 1/2 of 2 times pi, so just pi. And then the same thing here, right? The entire circle would be 30, this is just the radius, times 2, which would be 60, times pi. But since this is 1/8 of it, you would just take that and divide it by 8. So 60 divided by 8 pi, which would reduce to 30 over 4, or 15 over 2. So it'd be 15 halves, or 7.5 pi, right? It just depends on how you want to do it. And then maybe you want to actually multiply by 3.14, because that's an approximation for pi, and get a decimal approximation. But don't unless you have to, right? If you're ever working with pi, just leave it as pi. Don't do decimals unless at the very end it says put your answer, to 2 decimals or 3 decimals or something like that. Otherwise, just leave it at pi, because that's more precise. 28 pi is precise. 88 is an approximation, right? Is about. And so it's always better to be precise rather than, kind of close. So in conclusion, we just need to know the basics of the metric system, kind of the scale of what their measurements are similar to ours, how to find perimeter and circumference, and that's everything we need to know.